Algernon is a drug development company that investigates safe and already approved drugs for new indications. We've got CEO Chris Moreau joining us today to discuss the company's recent transactions and its plan for AP188, its DMT stroke research program. Good day, I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. It's Tuesday, April 16th. Please remember this is neither recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Chris, great to have you back. It's been a while. The company's has some very large changes recently. Please tell us all about that. You've been busy.
Been busy, and it's been a while since you and I have chatted, so it's good to be back with you. I guess the exciting news that we let out about 2 weeks ago now was that we had completed a transaction with a private U.S. drug development company by the name of Seyltx, headed up by Dr. Dietrich Stefan, who is a geneticist and a CEO. And we sold our Ifendprodil drug for $2 million US and a 20% common share equity position in Seyltx. So that is it's exciting news for Algernon. Just if we go back and we'll talk a bit about how we started with Ifendprodil, its origin. We investigated it for IPF and for chronic cough. And while we've sold our interest and rights, our patent suite around Ifendprodil for all indications that we've looked at, the real focus for Seyltx is going to be chronic cough. So that was the recent big news announcement about 2 weeks ago.
That seems to be a great kind of compromise for you guys, where you guys get some cash up front, and then you get a residual interest in them developing the drug, and then if they have the resources then to push that program forward. And there's obviously been some precedent success in the chronic cough space. Could you tell us a little bit more about the company and what their plans are or their abilities are and so forth? Because they are a private company, right?
Yeah, they're a private co. We were introduced to Dietrich through a U.S. investment banking firm that we retained to try to explore different options for Algernon. And originally, they were trying to identify a SPAC for Algernon, but very difficult market. And with a SPAC, which is where people will make an investment in this is a U.S.-based program, that investment is secured through a treasury bill, and you could have 1, 2, 3, 400 million in that SPAC, and then the SPAC goes out to find a target company. And when there's a combination, usually investors will redeem. You have almost 100% redemption, or they rather withdraw their capital. So now you've got a publicly traded entity, and now you have to go out and raise capital. But that market really changed, and we were introduced to Dr. Stefan, and he was very, very interested in Ifendprodil. We talked about a number. We basically have 3 programs that we're advancing. One is the Ifendprodil program. The second is DMT. We're investigating it for stroke, and we have a program around chronic kidney disease, a drug called Rapirinas, which is also repurposed. But Dietrich was really the first scientist slash businessman who really dug into the data. And he was very knowledgeable about the recent transaction between GSK and Bellus Health, the Merck drug gefapixant, how those drugs performed, what their valuations were. I mean, Bellus sold their drug for $2 billion to GSK. And so he was very interested in understanding the data. And so he really dug in. And probably some of his focus initially was in speaking with one of our lead advisors, Dr. Jacqueline Smith, who is a cough expert. She happened to be Merck's cough expert. She also was Bellis Health's cough expert. And when Mark Williams and I reached out to her, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, right off the top, she said she thought that Ifendprodil would have a very good chance of working in the chronic cough space. She had done a study with an NMDA receptor antagonist, which is what Ifendprodil is, with great success, although it caused dissociative effect. But she was very strong from day one. And she said, I want to get on your board. I'd like to help. And so I believe that her contribution, her insight, her confidence in the potential of the drug was a huge starting point for Dr. Stephan to move it forward and ultimately for us to do this transaction.
And just as a reminder for investors out there, on the Bellis Health transaction, Bellis Health was a Canadian biotech firm developing this chronic cough drug. And then I can't remember how many phases of development they went through, but then GSK bought them for $2 billion. So a nice Canadian biotech win.
Yeah, they actually went through a phase 2B.
Okay.
So Ifendprodil completed a phase 2A. We're ready to start our phase 2B. Bellis Health went through their phase 2B, and then after that, based on the data, they were acquired. You had asked a bit about what the plans are for Seyltx. They are currently engaged in a financing round. Their objective is their goal is to raise about 25 million. I understand at $100 million valuation. And why I think this is important for investors who are watching and like value just fundamentals is that we will have some dilution, but we expect to retain somewhere in the 15% equity after that financing completes, which would mean Algernon would basically own 15% of a private company that had a valuation of 100 million. And that would mean that investors, funds that they're pitching and talking to, if they close that transaction, and when they do, that will be a third-party valuation. And just looking at the facts, when Bellis Health started their phase 2B, and they had a bit of a rough ride. They failed in their phase 2A. They revisited their data, and they said, well, if you have a certain number of minimum coughs per hour, then our drug is helpful. My notes say they had a market cap of about 240 million at the start of their phase 2B, but they had 100 million in the bank. So about 140 million market cap US for Bellis when they started their phase 2B. It's, I think, reasonable that Seyltx is looking at a 100 million US valuation for the Ifendprodil cough program.
Yeah. And the US biotech markets are much more liquid and flush than the Canadian, and things seem to be turning around. So hopefully this cold winter especially the biotech land is thawing. So hopefully, good success there, and they can raise the money they need at a good valuation.
Yeah, and that will be something that we will announce to the market.
Yeah.
And will it be next week, next month, 3 months? But when that deal closes, then just on fundamentals, we'll have a significant value creation. But here's the second point that investors need to think about. Once they close that financing, it's a green light to start the phase 2B study. Now they still have to, they're right now beginning to get the finished drug product ready so that the trial can begin. They have to file for an IND with the US FDA. But remember, we have already filed a pre-IND with the US FDA. So we're not anticipating, and again, they're running the show, but we're from the sidelines, we're helping them. We're not anticipating any issues. But when that trial starts, that will be now another important milestone because the results will be binary. Did Ifendprodil outperform Merck? Will it outperform the GSK drug? Will it be as good as? Will it be better? Will it fail? Investors need to remember that historically, phase 2 trials are about 50-50. 50% are successful, 50% failure. But in the failure, you have about 15% due to safety issues. And we have no safety concerns with Ifendprodil. 40 years on the market in Japan. We ran a COVID study with Ifendprodil. We ran a phase 2A. So it changes the odds a bit. If investors like to invest in phase 2 trial companies, and here's the rub, Seyltx is private. And unless they do an IPO, and that's possible, that's their call, before the data comes out, the only way to buy into the deal will be to acquire a piece of Algernon.
Yep. And then if they do go public, there'll be a daily indicator on what your whatever percentage is worth. So it'll be, you'll have that clarity as well on it. Well, I'm just thinking you've got a little over what, 20 million shares outstanding, 22 million shares?
22 million shares.
And you got 2 million US.
2.7 Canadian. Now we had to clean up our balance sheet. It's been a very, very difficult last year and a half for everyone, not just Algernon. And when a family member said to me after the deal was that it must have been tough to sort of, I don't know, you're giving your baby up for adoption, but I'm quite pragmatic in this respect. We had a 2 million Canadian market cap.
Yeah, so obviously there was some
we sold this for 2 million US, just this one asset.
And you've got the equity.
We have the equity. How could I have raised, 25 million to get the study done? There was no way, given the chance, that I wasn't going to get Ifendprodil into a trial. When Dr. Mark Williams and I, the co-founder of Algernon, this was his original idea to look for drugs that had never been sold in the US or Europe. And that included Ifendprodil, quietly on the market in Japan for 40 years. Excellent safety history, small molecule. And Mark started to look at that and say, hey, if we brought that drug over here, there's no generic competition. And if we get a patent issued, first off, we'll get 5 or 6 years protection from the US FDA. Any new drug gets it. But we'll file method of use. And it's a very, I think, exceptional idea. We had great animal data. Let's not forget that when we ran a guinea pig cough study and we went up against Merck's drug, gefapixant, Ifendprodil outperformed that drug in the animal study by 110%. And it's a very simple study. Not to be cliche, but it is a guinea pig model because rats and mice don't have a cough reflex. So they put a compound, citric acid, they aerosolize it, the guinea pigs breathe it in, and you measure time to first cough and then cough frequency. And Ifendprodil outperformed Merck. So we lowered the number of coughs as measured in this study. We couldn't go up against the Bellus drug at the time because they had not disclosed the structure at that time.
Yeah.
And so we were only able to, but that gave us the energy to now say, well, let's add cough to our IPF program in Australia, and the rest is history. We got very good data, good statistical significance in terms of 24-hour cough reduction over 4 and 12 weeks. And it was that data that got this US group excited and interested and got them to the table and signed this deal.
All right. Well, that deal is done. They've got to do the work now on it to help create value for both you and them. And your new program, the new focus, or I guess, have we addressed with everything there? Is there anything else you want to say before we switch focus over to your DMT stroke program?
No, I think we've covered off. And if any investors or viewers have questions at the end, I'll be glad to take them. But it was a very important transaction for us. I want to add 1 or 2 more things.
All right.
last I'd say in the last year, if investors are following Algernon, you'll see that some of our patents are starting to get issued. Rapirinas for CKD, Ifendprodil for IPF in the US, in China, in Japan. And we're quite confident that we will receive a patent, or Seyltx rather, it's in their hands now, will have method of use patents issued for Ifendprodil and cough. And it just adds to the value of what we're doing and can give confidence to investors too about our other programs. Because, and by the way, and I want to congratulate our Canadian patent attorney, David Heller from Ridout and Maybe, now acquired by Smart and Bigger. And I'm not kidding. That is the name of the law firm that acquired them, Smart and Bigger. He in the transaction during the due diligence period, the U.S. patent attorney looked at the patent suite for Ifendprodil and said, I don't do this often, but I really need to compliment the Algernon IP and team. Fantastic work. And the work we put into our Ifendprodil IP is the same work and the same focus and skill that we're putting in strategy into Rapirinas for CKD and DMT and so on. So just some additional info on that transaction.
All right. And on to the newer and better things, or maybe not better, but newer things, new outlook and the new project and program.
Right. So our second lead program, we are investigating the psychedelic drug N,N-dimethyltryptamine, known as DMT, for stroke. And just to give folks a little bit of background, we're probably all familiar with ayahuasca. This is a tea that contains DMT, and also it's combined with another plant so that the stomach can absorb the DMT and it can go into the bloodstream and get into the brain. There's chemistry in the stomach. If you just consume DMT, it would break it down. It would not allow it to pass through the gut wall and get into the bloodstream. So ayahuasca is DMT with another plant combined, and you drink this drink, and you, depending on the dosage, you'll have a psychedelic experience. Well, a number of years ago at the University of California, and a research scientist did some work looking at the effects of different psychedelic drugs on neuronal growth. And this was all done in vitro. So think test tube. But he exposed cortical neurons from rats to LSD, amphetamine, and DMT. And what was really interesting is you have a class effect. All of the psychedelic drugs created growth with the neurons. And obviously they had the control plate where there was no a drug treatment, and you did, the growth, and it's on our website, is quite significant. And basically it almost looks like the bottom of a plant that you pull out an annual, all of these roots. They're called dendritic spines. They come out of the neuron, and these spines connect with other brain neurons, and those are synapses. That's how neurons communicate. So the energy flows through these connectors. So the arbor, the width, the density of these spines is measured. And when we looked at that and said, wow, this is definitely an effect. It's visual. LSD is problematic. It's not only it can be a bad trip, it's a long trip. It has a half-life of about 24 hours. So if you were to use it as a therapeutic agent, it takes a long time to clear. And the best was DMT, better than amphetamine in terms of this neuronal growth. And DMT has a half-life of 8 minutes. So it really makes it a very interesting target. That research scientist went on to test psychedelics at sub-psychedelic levels in depression models with animals And what he found was quite interesting. You don't need the psychedelic dose to create that growth in the neuron. So this is very interesting. And what was compelling and made us decide to step in was a study that was done in Hungary about 2 years later by an investigator with the last name of Nardai and his group. They took rats, created a stroke injury by blocking the blood flow to one side of their brain, treated with DMT, and then measured the damage area in the brain called the infarct volume, and then they tested motor function of the rats. Basically, it's sort of a pellet test. Food the rat can reach out and grab, and the function of that arm is measured and so on. So after 30 days, the DMT group almost had a full recovery of motor function. And the damage area in the brain was reduced compared to the untreated rats. So this was quite exciting. And Mark Williams, who was still our CSO at the time, working with Dr. Chris Bryan, our current CSO, really went to work and started to formulate a plan for us investigating DMT. The key part, we don't want to open clinics. We aren't intending to hire, that's a different strategy. For us, it needs to be a pharmaceutical strategy, which means you need good data and a IP position. What's the patent? So you can't patent DMT, it's naturally occurring. And because Nardai published that stroke study, we couldn't get method of use. So what Mark Williams and Chris Bryan did is they came back and said, we're going to make some structural changes to DMT called a salt change, where we don't have to go back to day one with all of our preclinical. You can change the salts. About 40% of drugs that are taken over the counter, by prescription, are combined with a salt form, makes it either more soluble, easier to manufacture, and the regulatory body sees that salt form as not a big difference. It's like Martin wearing a ball cap, and then the next day you're wearing a football helmet. It's still Martin, although there's a slight change, maybe a good way to describe it. So we filed 2 new patents for 2 different salt forms of DMT, and we began to do our research. So I promised you I wouldn't answer you with 15-minute answers. So I'm going to break there a bit and give you a chance to step in.
So just to clarify, the concept is somebody has a stroke and then it would be administered after the stroke to help the healing process.
Right. Most stroke drugs that have been investigated have been focused on trying to reduce the damage while the stroke is occurring. And keep in mind that it's a process. If your partner finds you passed out on your couch or you don't wake up in the morning, 911, you get taken hopefully to a stroke center. They have to do a brain scan. Do you have a hemorrhagic stroke, which is a bleed? About 15% of people have a bleed. That's very serious. 85% have a blockage called an ischemic stroke. And then they decide on your treatment options from there. If you have a bleed, they try to mechanically stop that bleed if they can, may have to clot and resolve on its own. If you have a blockage, they can give you a clot busting drug. If it's in a large vessel, they can go in, it's called a thrombectomy, they can remove that clot. Sadly, about 85% of ischemic stroke patients have no treatment options. They don't get to the hospital fast enough to get the clot buster, or the stroke is in a small vessel, the blockage, they can't get to it. So the idea would be, and this is the study we're about to conduct in Europe, is that when somebody is imaged, and if they're ischemic, then we will enter them into our study. And specifically, if they're going for a thrombectomy, we want to match as close as we can to the animal stroke study that was done, the rat stroke model. And they'll be given DMT. Patients will have a placebo. Our primary endpoint will be safety. We've tested DMT in a healthy population intravenously, but this will be the first time a stroke patient gets DMT. And then we'll be looking and we'll be treating them for a number of hours. We still have to learn a bit about how the sigma-1 receptor is being, it's binding with DMT, and it's creating BDNF in the brain, which is a healing factor. We have to learn more about that mechanism, but the hope is in this study, we will see as secondary endpoints, reduction of the size area of damage, reduction of an improvement of motor function, reduction of cognitive deficits, and all of the problems that occur when you have a stroke and you have damage in the brain.
You mentioned the safety trial is going to start off with stroke victims. Is there going to be a healthy population safety study done initially, or does it go straight to the stroke?
Well, we've actually already done our phase 1.
Okay.
So we completed it last fall. It was done in the Netherlands, where we had 3 sets of healthy patients come in over a 24-hour period. We would inject them with a dose of DMT, subpsychedelic. Remember, we talked about how that investigator at the University of California found that, hey, you don't need to give that psychedelic dose to see it working in the brain. So these patients, we did 3 different dosing levels just up to the psychedelic dose, which is 0.2 milligrams per kilogram. And over a 24-hour period, we started with an injection. So it's we bring them up to that level, and then we hold them at that constant rate over 24 hours, no issues. So there have been a number of DMT phase 1 studies. The focus is for depression or PTSD. We're going in the stroke direction, but we're not concerned about healthy patients, but just process. This will be the first time we've tested DMT in a stroke patient.
Yeah.
Don't expect any issues, but you have to be, you walk first before you run.
All right. And roughly how big of a trial would is this like a phase 2A trial or?
About 50 patients.
Okay.
We had an interesting email last fall. NARDI, the investigator that did the rat stroke study, is also a clinician. And he sent us an email. We, of course, had been introduced to him, but he said, listen, I've been appointed the head of Hungary's largest stroke hospital, about 600 or 700 patients a year. You're doing fantastic work. DMT, my group and my colleagues have done so much work. How can I help? So we said, wow, you can help. You'll very keen to have you as a PI and conduct the study at your hospital and maybe 1 or 2 others. We do have 2 luminaries in the stroke world from the UK who are sitting on our advisory board. We have the drug product ready. So that means the intravenous solution is ready to go. And, pending the ethics approval, once ethics approval would be given, we could start that trial, very, very quickly.
All right. And do you have already the hospitals or the facilities that have agreed to participate?
Well, technically, that would sort of be a signed contract, but we've identified a number of hospitals, including the hospital that NARDI is at. We haven't sort of signed the contract research papers yet to say, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Our focus has been, we've been limited by access to capital.
Yeah.
And so hopefully with this last transaction and more eyes on our stock and story and increased liquidity and healthier share price days, we'll be in a better position to start advancing more aggressively this DMT stroke program. From what we can see, there may be some private companies behind the scenes. I mean, once you start a clinical trial, you have to come out of the weeds and announce. But we seem to be the only company in the world investigating a psychedelic drug and trying to encourage neuroplasticity. That's the growth of neurons and the normal process that occurs when you have a brain injury, where the brain is trying to rewire itself. So that's the difference. I've talked to an analyst he doesn't like stroke. He doesn't like the space. Too many drugs have failed. And to me, that like we go by the data. I mean, I wouldn't personally say, well, I don't like stroke because, I mean, what's the data say? Is the data compelling? And if it's compelling, then it should be interesting. And there aren't any other companies that are investigating neuroplasticity as a treatment for stroke patients at the level of Algernon. And I think that's important and exciting. And it's a very important area of need. There are really very limited treatment options for people that have had an ischemic stroke.
All right. Do you have an idea of ballpark what a program like this would cost to run?
Yeah, you'd be surprised, but we're really talking about somewhere in the 2 million Canadian range to run that study.
Really? Okay.
And I can tell you that from some of the interactions we've had with U.S. funds, and they look at Algernon, how we operate, capital efficient, how we've run. If you remember the COVID days, there were hundreds of companies that talked about running studies. We ran a study.
Yeah.
Front to end. We completed it. We ran that study for almost under 10 million Canadian, unheard of. You almost get to a point where you're talking to some of these funds where they're sort of incredulous, like oh, you couldn't run a study for that. How could that be? But we've
Right.
done it, and why other companies, either their overhead or whatever their approach is, that's their model. But we can run a study very cost effectively.
All right. All right. So any rough timeline or what milestones investors should be looking for as you come up to that? What are sort of key milestones that you have to hit before you can continue or start the program?
So what we've done, and we did this last year, is we actually created a subsidiary called Algernon NeuroScience. It's a wholly owned 100% owned by Algernon Pharma, and we transferred the DMT stroke assets into Algernon Neuro. And the idea was to try to get it out of Algernon Pharma because we have this low market cap, this legacy issue, because a phase 2A stroke program, if you look at some other comparables, 10, 20, 30 million US, well, Algernon Pharma is at 2 million. So it's nothing new. It's been done in a lot of resource companies where they try to move that asset off and then bring investors. So what I would like to do, and what we are currently engaged in, is looking to partner Algernon Neuro with funds that invest in psychedelic drugs and have a fund partner with us, not only for this phase 2A, but the phase 2B, the production of our novel salt compound, and to have a partner going forward. So that's our focus. I can't put a finger on it right now, but the next sort of announcement would be in order that we have identified a partner, we've signed a deal, and we have a fund or two or three coming to Algernon Neuro, becoming our partner. Algernon Pharma team will run it. And if we have good data from our phase 2A stroke study, we could always do an IPO with Algernon Neuro.
So let's say
in the US.
Some other funds invest in Algernon Neuro. That would be dilution at the Algernon Neuro bit level, not on the mothership, Algernon Pharma. So that would be diluting the project, so to speak, not the whole corporation.
Martin, you must have been an analyst in another life.
I'll try. All right. Okay. So and then we do have a question here from the audience about could Chris speak on the possible listing of on NASDAQ? And I guess that sort of could be Algernon Pharma listing on NASDAQ, or it could be Algernon Neuro
Yeah.
listing on NASDAQ, and what are your thoughts or perspectives on the likelihood and of that?
So just to give some color, and it's been long enough now, but we did attempt working with Ladenburg, an investment bank in the US, to uplist to the NASDAQ in about 7 days, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I bet you we pitched 40 funds. We had approval from the US SEC to list, meaning all of our prospectus, our financials. And we needed to raise about 14 million to give us the market cap to be able to list. There's different listing requirements for the NASDAQ. We had a soft book of about 9 million, but sadly, during our pitch, the world was on fire. Russia had invaded the Ukraine. Markets, they tanked. We think it's difficult now. If you look back almost 2 years ago when this started, so we were unable to do that. So that was always our objective. When Mark Williams talked about the future of Algernon and to get value for a phase 2 trial, 50, 60, 80, 100 million, you really have to be on the NASDAQ.
Yeah.
And so that is something we'll just have to see. Can we, with our strategies of Algernon NeuroScience and the success of the Seyltx financing and the start of that trial, will we be able to build the critical mass to be able to do that? But that is, we were approved. I can tell you that our data room, our intellectual property, our structure, our strategy, our governance, all of it, we started from day one, Mark and I, saying we wanted to get onto the NASDAQ. And timing is everything in life. So we'll have to see.
Would you consider out licensing the DMT program and just sort of sticking around for, call it, the residuals on it, or I'm guessing that's not your preferred path, but
not a preferred path because I don't think we'll get the value rate now.
Okay.
As the phase 2A, and we have had a company that reached out. They're in this space. They don't have a pipeline, so they reached out. And then we did the Ifendprodil transaction, and I thought, you know what? I don't want to give away the DMT stroke program. And we have one more program, that's CKD for Apeironas, so we could focus as a management team on that. But we are phase 2A ready.
Yeah.
So I would rather go out and find a partner or two to invest, and have the Algernon management team drive that study, and let's see where we're at with phase 2A data. I think it will be very potentially exciting if we find that not only is it safe, but we've reduced infarct volume, improved motor function, reduced deficits. That would be really something.
All right. I have a question here regarding Ifendprodil. Quote, following a chronic cough trial in Australia, New Zealand, patients asked if they could continue using Ifendprodil after the end of the trial. What were the results of that continuation of Ifendprodil use?
It's a very good question. We did announce that there was a request, and I'm sorry I don't have that information as to the exact number of patients and ongoing supply. It's something that I can look into. I don't know how I would communicate that but that individual could always send me an email.
All right.
At Chris at AlgernonPharmaceuticals.com, and I would attempt to get that information.
All right. Excellent. Chris, we've covered a lot of material here. I no questions are outstanding in my brain. Have we covered everything you want to, or is there anything else you want to discuss before we wrap it up?
I think that's good for now. I'm again, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for those who joined us today, and we're going to keep moving forward.
All right, Chris. Thank you very much. Great seeing you again, and talk to you again soon. We'll be watching the news wires, seeing what news you get over the goal line here.
Thanks, Martin. We'll talk soon.
Cheers.